Welcome to our channel. Please remember to like this video and subscribe to Relation Tales. We deeply appreciate every one of you. Share in the comments where you're tuning in from. We'd love to hear from you. Let's dive in. Henry Lawson's life had always been one of consistency. Each day flowed seamlessly, a reliable rhythm of work, family, and small joys like his Sunday golf rounds. But that evening, as he stepped into his house, the usual comfort seemed to vanish. It was as if the air itself had thickened, heavy with a silent tension. Emma sat at the dining table, a bottle of red wine uncorked and 2 glasses set. The sight caught him off guard. Emma rarely drank without an occasion. Yet here she was, waiting, her hands gripping the stem of her glass tightly. Her face appeared calm, but her eyes betrayed a storm simmering beneath the surface. "Hey," Henry greeted her, forcing a smile as he placed his keys on the kitchen counter. "What's all this? Are we celebrating something?" Emma's lips curved into a faint smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Sit down, Henry. We need to talk." It wasn't her words that sent a chill down his spine, but the way she said them, measured, almost rehearsed. Henry's heart began to race, a sense of unease tightening around his chest. He pulled out a chair and sat, reaching for the glass of wine she had poured for him. "Emma, what's going on?" he asked, his voice steady even as his thoughts spiraled toward worst-case scenarios. Emma took a sip of her wine, her gaze drifting briefly before settling on him. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," she began, her tone deliberate. "About us. About our marriage." Henry set his glass down, leaning slightly forward. "What do you mean? Is something wrong?" She hesitated, and in that moment, Henry saw the woman he had loved for over 2 decades struggling to find the right words. When she finally spoke, her confession hit him like a blow. "I feel like I've lost myself," she admitted. "I've been your wife, the mother of our children, but somewhere along the way, I forgot who I am as an individual." Henry blinked, caught completely off guard. "Emma, we've built a life together. A good life. What are you saying?" Her grip on the wine glass tightened. "I'm saying I need to rediscover myself, to figure out who I am and what I want." A hollow feeling settled in Henry's stomach. "And you think you can't do that with me?" Emma looked away. "I need space, Henry. I need to explore outside the confines of our marriage." Took a moment for her words to sink in. When they finally did, Henry felt his world tilt. "You want to see other people?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Emma nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Yes, just for a while, to understand what I need." The silence that followed was suffocating. Henry stared at her, a whirlwind of disbelief, anger, and pain swirling within him. Henry didn't say much after that. He excused himself and headed upstairs, his steps heavy against the polished wooden floor. In their bedroom, he stopped in front of the mirror. The man staring back at him seemed older, more worn, like years had passed in mere moments. Moving mechanically, he changed out of his golf clothes, pulling on a sweatshirt. Then, an idea struck him, a way to preserve this moment and ensure he wouldn't forget a single word of Emma's confession. He reached for his phone, opened the voice recording app, and discreetly pressed record before sliding it into his pocket. When he returned to the dining room, Emma was still there, her glass nearly empty. She began speaking again, her words deliberate and carefully rehearsed. She outlined her plans, mentioning she intended to meet someone new. Just for dinner, she claimed. But Henry wasn't naive. He could sense the growing emotional chasm between them. Now that gap felt insurmountable. "I've made arrangements for Friday," Emma said, her voice softer now, almost pleading. "I'll be back Saturday morning, and we can talk then." Henry stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I think I need some air," he said flatly. Without waiting for her response, he grabbed his car keys and left, the door closing behind him with quiet finality. Driving aimlessly through the city, Henry let the blur of lights distract him as tears threatened to spill. Eventually, he stopped at a 24-hour diner, its neon sign buzzing faintly in the stillness of the night. Inside, he ordered coffee, though he had no intention of drinking it. He played Emma's recording twice, each word cutting deeper than the last. When he couldn't bear to listen anymore, he pulled out his phone and called Rachel. "Hey, Dad." Rachel's cheerful voice was a sharp contrast to the storm within him. "Rachel, I need you and Ethan on the line," he said, his voice strained. "It's urgent." Her tone immediately shifted. "What's wrong? Are you okay? Just trust me. Can you get Ethan?" Moments later, the three of them were connected on a conference call. Henry hesitated briefly before pressing play on the recording. Emma's voice filled the silence, exposing her plans. When the recording ended, Rachel was the first to speak, her voice trembling with anger. "What the hell? She wants to date other men to fix your marriage?" Ethan, usually reserved, let out a low curse. "She's lost it, Dad." Henry exhaled shakily. "I don't know what to do. I needed you both to hear it from her." Rachel's voice was resolute. "We'll figure this out together, Dad. She doesn't get to tear this family apart without consequences." Ethan agreed, his tone steady. "We've got your back." For the first time that night, Henry felt a glimmer of hope. His children were his anchor, and with their support, he knew he could face whatever lay ahead. The next morning, Henry awoke with a clarity he hadn't felt in months. His mind was no longer clouded by confusion or despair. It was sharp with resolve. Emma's betrayal wasn't just a slight against him. It was an assault on the family they had built, and Henry wasn't about to let her walk away unscathed. Pouring himself a cup of black coffee, he sat at the kitchen table. His phone in hand, Henry stared at a single name at the top of his recent calls. Margaret Pierce. Renowned as one of the city's most aggressive divorce attorneys, she was known for her sharp, strategic mind and unyielding determination. Though Henry had met her years ago through a mutual friend, he never imagined he'd require her expertise. "Margaret, it's Henry Lawson," he said when she answered. "I need your help." Margaret wasted no time with pleasantries. She scheduled a meeting for later that day, her tone brisk and professional. "Bring everything you've got," she advised. "The more information, the better." That afternoon, Henry found himself in Margaret's sleek downtown office. The space, with its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city, exuded modern sophistication. Margaret, a composed woman in her early 40s, greeted him with a firm handshake. "Let's get to work," she said, motioning for him to sit. Henry placed all his evidence on the table. The recording of Emma's confession, screenshots of text messages he had retrieved from her phone, and printed emails between Emma and a man named Vincent. The explicit nature of the messages left no doubt about their relationship. Margaret examined the materials meticulously, jotting down notes as she went. When she finally looked up, her expression was serious. "This is solid evidence," she stated firmly. "It clearly establishes adultery, which will work heavily in your favor during the divorce proceedings. We can argue for a larger share of the marital assets. And with your children supporting you, we can build an even stronger case." Henry nodded, his jaw tight. "I want her to face the consequences of her actions, Margaret. She didn't just betray me. She betrayed our entire family." Margaret's lips curved into a faint, approving smile. "We'll make sure of it." For the next hour, they strategized. Margaret outlined the best course of action, including how and when to serve Emma with divorce papers. They agreed on a pivotal moment: her upcoming date with Vincent. The public setting would amplify the humiliation, ensuring Emma felt the full weight of her choices. The days leading up to Friday were a whirlwind of preparation. Henry, Rachel, and Ethan worked together, their shared anger and determination fueling them. They carefully packed Emma's belongings, boxing up her clothes, personal items, and anything else that reminded them of her presence in the house. Rachel was relentless, her movements sharp and deliberate. "She doesn't deserve to stay here," she muttered, stuffing a pair of Emma's designer shoes into a box. "This house is ours, not hers." Ethan, though quieter, was equally resolute. He carried box after box to the car, his expression grim. "She made her choice," he said simply. "Now she has to live with it." By Friday morning, nearly all traces of Emma were gone. Henry had arranged for her belongings to be delivered to a storage unit near her parents' home. The locks on the doors had been changed, and the house felt lighter, freer, as though it was finally shedding the weight of betrayal. Standing in the living room, Henry took in the silence. "This is it," he said, his voice steady. "Tonight, everything changes." That evening, Emma arrived at an upscale restaurant dressed in a striking red gown. Her hair was styled to perfection, and she radiated confidence. A woman seemingly ready to embrace her newfound freedom. Vincent greeted her with a warm smile, pulling out her chair as they settled into an evening of indulgence. The restaurant's dim lighting and romantic ambience heightened Emma's sense of exhilaration. For the first time in years, she felt alive, desired. Their conversation flowed easily, punctuated by laughter and intimate glances. Sipping her wine, Emma savored the moment, until a familiar voice shattered the illusion. "Mom!" Emma looked up to see Rachel standing at their table, her tone cold and cutting, her eyes blazing with fury. The smile froze on Emma's face, the color draining from her cheeks. "Rachel, what are you doing here?" Rachel ignored Vincent entirely, her focus locked on her mother. "I could ask you the same thing," she said sharply. "Out here on a date while Dad's at home picking up the pieces of the life you destroyed." Emma opened her mouth to respond, but Rachel didn't give her the chance. "How could you do this? To him? To us?" The confrontation drew the attention of nearby diners. Whispers rippled through the room as heads turned to witness the unfolding drama. Emma's voice was strained, almost a whisper. "Rachel, please." "Not here." But Rachel wasn't finished. "You didn't think twice about humiliating Dad," she said, her voice rising. "So why should I care about your embarrassment?" Before Emma could respond, a man in a suit approached their table, a thick envelope in hand. "Mrs. Emma Lawson?" he asked, his voice loud enough to carry across the room. Emma's hands trembled as she accepted the envelope. "Yes, that's me. You've been served," the man announced, placing the documents firmly into her grasp. The room fell into a stunned silence. Emma sat frozen, her eyes wide with shock as she stared at the divorce papers now in her hands. Vincent shifted uncomfortably in his seat, muttering an excuse before quickly leaving the table. Rachel leaned in close, her voice low and fierce. "You brought this on yourself." Without another word, she turned and walked out of the restaurant, leaving Emma alone in her humiliation. The whispers around the room grew louder, the weight of judgment pressing down on her from all sides. Later that night, when Emma arrived home, she found the locks changed. Her key was useless. Desperation mounting, she pounded on the door. "Henry!" she cried, her voice cracking. "Let me in." Her phone buzzed in her hand. It was Henry. "Emma," he said, his tone cold and detached. "There's a letter in the envelope. Read it. Everything you need to know is there." The line went dead. With shaking hands, Emma tore open the envelope and pulled out the letter. Henry's words were blunt and unforgiving. "Emma, you made your choice and now I'm making mine. You've been served with divorce papers citing adultery. Your belongings have been moved to a storage unit. The key and address are included. Our children stand with me. Do not contact me except through my lawyer. This is the consequence of your actions. Live with it. Henry." Emma sank to the ground, the weight of her decisions crashing down on her. The life she had taken for granted was gone, and she had no one to blame but herself. Sitting on the cold pavement outside her former home, Emma clutched Henry's letter, the simple words cutting deep. It was a stark reminder of the irrevocable damage she had caused. She had gambled everything: her marriage, her family, her home, and lost. Wiping her tears, she fumbled for her phone and dialed Rachel's number. It rang once, twice, before going to voicemail. Emma swallowed hard and tried Ethan next, only to face the same result. Both of her children had shut her out. Letting out a shaky breath, she stared at the darkened windows of the house that had once been her sanctuary. With no other options, she gathered herself and drove to the storage unit Henry had mentioned. The quiet streets stretched before her, giving her ample time to reflect on the choices that had led her here. The storage unit was cold and impersonal. Unlocking it with the small key, Emma found herself surrounded by neatly labeled boxes bearing her name. It was a physical manifestation of her exile. Everything she had once shared with Henry now compartmentalized and removed from the life they had built together. She spent hours sitting amidst the remnants of her old life, rifling through photographs, keepsakes, and clothes. Each item was a painful reminder of what she had thrown away. By the time she finally left, dawn was breaking, and Emma felt like a shadow of the woman she had once been. Monday morning arrived with a sense of dread. Emma walked into her office, keeping her head down, hoping to avoid the curious stares of her colleagues. But the whispers followed her like a shadow. The full weight of her public disgrace hit when she discovered the video of her restaurant confrontation with Rachel had gone viral. A fellow diner had recorded the entire scene and posted it online, where it quickly spread across social media. The comments were merciless, with strangers condemning her as selfish and unfaithful. By mid-morning, her boss called her into his office, his expression grim. "Emma," he began, his tone heavy with disappointment. "I'm sure you've seen the video circulating online." She nodded, her throat tight. "This kind of publicity is damaging. Not just for you, but for our company. Effective immediately, we're putting you on an indefinite leave of absence." Emma felt the ground shift beneath her. She had expected judgment from her family, but the professional fallout was a blow she hadn't anticipated. Leaving the office with her head bowed, she faced the stark reality of her new life. Alone, unemployed, and ostracized. In the weeks that followed, Emma's isolation deepened. Attempts to reach out to Vincent were met with cold indifference. After the public spectacle, he quickly distanced himself, unwilling to be tied to the scandal. His final message to her was curt: "We should move on. This isn't what I signed up for." Emma tried to rebuild her life in a small, cramped apartment. Without her family, her career, or even Vincent, the days blurred into an endless stretch of emptiness. She spent nights scrolling through old family photos, each image a painful reminder of what she had lost. The loneliness was unbearable. She considered calling Henry, begging for forgiveness, but his letter had made it clear there was no going back. Her children's silence was equally agonizing, a wound that refused to heal. One evening, after another failed attempt to contact Rachel, Emma stumbled upon a social media post from Henry. It was a photo of him, Rachel, and Ethan smiling at a family dinner. The caption read, "Stronger together." Tears streamed down Emma's face as she stared at the screen. The family she had once taken for granted was thriving without her. She was left with nothing but regret. Amid the darkness, Emma began to confront harsh truths about herself. She had spent years ignoring her unhappiness, believing an affair would fill the void. But her selfish, short-sighted choices had cost her everything. Determined to find redemption, Emma started therapy. The sessions were raw and painful, forcing her to confront the root of her discontent. She spoke about her marriage, the affair, and the insecurities that had driven her to seek validation elsewhere. Slowly, Emma began piecing her life back together. She volunteered at a community center, finding purpose in helping others. She also reached out to Rachel and Ethan, sending letters of apology that acknowledged her mistakes without expecting forgiveness. At first, there was no response. Over time, Rachel began to reply cautiously, then more openly. Their conversations were tentative and filled with unresolved pain, but they marked the beginning of a fragile reconnection. Months turned into a year. Emma's life slowly stabilized. She found a new job, less prestigious but fulfilling. Her relationship with her children remained a work in progress, but she cherished every interaction, no matter how small. Henry, meanwhile, had fully embraced his new life. His bond with Rachel and Ethan had only deepened, and he had begun dating again. Though the pain of Emma's betrayal lingered, it no longer defined him. One day, Emma received a letter from Henry. It was short but sincere, acknowledging her efforts to make amends and wishing her well. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was closure. Emma folded the letter carefully, holding it to her chest. For the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of peace. Her journey was far from over, but she was finally on the path to healing. Months passed, and while Emma's progress was steady, the scars of her choices remained. Therapy had become her lifeline, a space where she could unravel the layers of guilt, shame, and loss. Her therapist often reminded her that growth wasn't about erasing the past but learning to carry it with grace. One evening, after a particularly emotional session, Emma stood at her apartment window, gazing at the city lights. Her mind drifted to the family dinners she once took for granted, the laughter of her children, and the quiet companionship she once shared with Henry. The pain of their absence lingered, but tonight it felt different. Less like a wound, more like a memory she could coexist with. Determined to reclaim her life, Emma began exploring ways to channel her experiences into something meaningful. She volunteered at a local shelter for women facing marital and personal crises. Listening to their stories, Emma found a sense of connection and purpose. She wasn't alone in her mistakes, and for the first time, she realized that sharing her journey might help others navigate their own struggles. One day, while sorting through donations at the shelter, Emma met Clara, a young woman with tear-streaked cheeks and a toddler clinging to her leg. Clara reminded Emma of herself, lost, isolated, and desperate for hope. Over time, Emma became a mentor to Clara, helping her find a job and secure childcare. Watching Clara's confidence grow filled Emma with a sense of fulfillment she hadn't felt in years. Meanwhile, her relationship with Rachel and Ethan slowly evolved. Rachel invited Emma to her college graduation, a gesture that left Emma overwhelmed with gratitude. Though the day was bittersweet, Henry was there, accompanied by his new partner. It marked a turning point. For the first time, Emma felt like she was part of her daughter's life again, even if only in a small way. Ethan, however, remained distant. Emma respected his boundaries, sending occasional texts or letters, but never pushing for a response. She knew that healing took time, and she was willing to wait as long as it took for him to be ready. Professionally, Emma discovered a passion for counseling. Drawing from her own experiences, she began studying to become a certified life coach, specializing in relationships and personal growth. Her classes were challenging, but they reignited a spark she hadn't felt in years. She started writing as well, short essays and reflections on the complexities of love, betrayal, and forgiveness. One of her essays, titled "Rebuilding from Ruins," was published in a local magazine. The piece resonated with many, leading to an influx of emails from readers who shared their own stories of loss and redemption. Emma's journey, once a source of shame, was now becoming a beacon for others. By the second year of her transformation, Emma had built a modest but meaningful life. She moved into a slightly larger apartment, decorated with second-hand furniture she had lovingly restored. Her days were filled with volunteering, studying, and occasionally meeting Rachel for coffee. Though her relationship with Ethan remained strained, she held on to hope. One afternoon, as Emma was sifting through her emails, she noticed a message from Ethan. Her heart raced as she opened it. "Mom, I've been thinking about everything. I'm not ready to forget, but I want to try and understand. Can we talk?" Ethan. Tears welled up in Emma's eyes. She replied with trembling fingers, keeping her response simple. "Of course. Whenever you're ready, I'm here." That evening, Emma sat by her window again, this time with a quiet sense of hope. The road ahead was still uncertain, but she was no longer paralyzed by regret. Her life wasn't what it once was, and perhaps it never would be, but it was hers to rebuild. As the city lights shimmered, Emma allowed herself a small smile. For the first time in years, she felt something close to contentment.